Hi, everyone. We're going to be talking today about our paper called Disproportionate Removals and Differing Content Moderation Experiences for Conservative, Transgender, and Black Social Media Users. I'm Oliver Haimson, and Daniel Delmonaco is also going to be presenting today. So we often hear in the news about particular groups who disproportionately face censorship on social media. So some examples here of conservatives being censored on Facebook, transgender people being censored on TikTok, and people of color experiencing censorship on Facebook and other platforms. But are these claims true? And if so, how might they relate to the experiences that and the types of content that people post? So we set out to answer 3 research questions. The first is, which groups of social media users have content and accounts removed more often than others for reasons they disagree with? What types of content and accounts are removed? And how might types of content and accounts removed differ between groups? So we conducted 2 surveys. The first survey was to understand which groups disproportionately have content removed, and we sampled about 900 people, oversampling for racial and ethnic minorities, transgender and non-binary people, LGBTQ people, and conservatives, and we asked people if they had had content or accounts taken down within the last year. Our second survey was to understand what types of content people had removed and why it was being removed. And this was a sample of about 200 people, again, oversampling for the same groups. And this time we asked open-ended questions about what types of content or accounts were removed and perceptions about why that might have happened. So these are the outcomes of some logistic regression models where the outcome variables were having content removed or having an account removed. And we found 3 groups that were disproportionately facing content and account removals. So the first was politically conservative participants, who were significantly more likely to have content and accounts removed as compared with moderate participants. Next, transgender participants were significantly more likely to have content and accounts removed when compared with cisgender participants. And then finally, Black participants were significantly more likely to have accounts removed when compared with white participants.
Thanks, Oliver. I'll now be discussing some of the findings related to our second and third research questions. More details about these findings can be found in our paper, but here I'll be focusing on the type of content removed across these 3 groups, since there were not significant differences found in the types of account removed. So for types of content, for our conservative participants, we found that the types of content most frequently removed were allegedly offensive or inappropriate content, COVID-related content, adult content, misinformation, and hate speech. For transgender participants, content was most frequently removed as adult despite following guidelines for insulting or criticizing a dominant group, and content that was trans or queer. And then for our Black participants, they most frequently experienced content being removed that was related to racial justice or describing racism or feminist content. And so for our conservative participants, some of the content that was reported as removed was, it was a disturbing image of a child. This was deemed offensive or inappropriate. I have recently shared posts about COVID and political views on Facebook, and they were all taken down for false facts. A video about pornography and link I sent to my status for my friends to follow, link, and view. And I said, I hate LGBT, and they removed it and banned me for 30 days. So it's clear that some of this content was disturbing, and that's why it was removed. Some participants might argue that some of this should still be allowed on social media, but they still disagreed with the decision by these platforms to remove that content. But at least according to site guidelines and kind of standards of common decency, it seems like there were clear-cut things that should have been removed. For example, I hate LGBT. So next, for our trans participants, participants commented that, for example, I posted a selfie on Tumblr where I was not wearing a shirt, but had my chest covered by tape so that it appeared flat and no tissue was visible. Tumblr took it down despite it being allowed. Then legitimately the entire content of the post was telling this transphobe to fuck off. And I had come out as transgender and the post was taken down within an hour. So all these examples tend to be different from what conservatives reported. It was often content that was related to participants' identities as trans people, and it often did not actually violate site guidelines, but was mistakenly removed. For example, the first quote about the picture of the participant's chest that did not actually violate site guidelines. And removals like this decrease people's agency to express their identity online when they feel like this content might be taken down. And lastly, for our Black participants, these are some examples of what they had taken down. I was discussing anti-racism and my post got removed for hateful speech because I mentioned white people in a negative way. I made a post about actual factual atrocities that Black people have suffered from white supremacists and systematic racism in America. And I uploaded a post about gender equality and sexual harassment on a group I belong to, but the post was taken down. So again, these are quite different from the experiences, especially of the conservative participants. It was content related to participants' individual identities that was related to their experiences of systemic racism in America. And oftentimes it did not actually violate the site guidelines, but was removed anyway. So this led to a decrease in people's agency to express their identities online.
So going back to these claims that we hear in the news about particular groups disproportionately facing censorship on social media, our results show that these claims are actually true, but the types of content removed are very different between the three groups. So this table summarizes our takeaways here. For the conservative participants, there was a broader trend of harmful content that was often removed by social media sites in order to cultivate safe and accurate online information. And this was usually content that was actually against site policies. For the transgender and Black participants in our study, the content was often related to participants' marginalized identities and usually was actually following site policies, or at least falls into gray areas when it comes to site policies. So this signals that what is considered worthy of removal, so what is or is not designated as offensive or inappropriate or misinformation or hate speech, this tends to differ greatly depending on who you ask. And so when we as researchers say that hate speech should be removed from social media sites, we know that there are a lot of people in our data set who disagree. And similarly, when social media sites say that misinformation should be removed, particularly like related to COVID, these positions are actually against the beliefs of participants in our data set who posted clearly false content and then disagreed with its removal. And so we can't really resolve these disagreements, but our work here is providing empirical evidence for whose social media content is disproportionately removed and potential insights into why. And so this is providing a first step that we hope future research and policy can build on. So I want to present quickly just a few potential ways forward to increase equity for marginalized social media users. So it might be the case that platforms and their moderation policies and procedures need to be completely restructured. But if we are going to work within existing systems, here are a few approaches that might help. So one is applying tags or blurring content that may be inaccurate or explicit, applying different moderation approaches for different online spaces depending on context. So it might be that there are different policies for posting on one's timeline versus in a private group, developing specialized tools, especially for particular marginalized groups, and finally, involving marginalized communities in creating moderation policy. So in summary, we found that political conservatives, trans people, and Black people all experience disproportionate levels of social media content and account removals, but the types of content that are removed from each group and the removal's implications are substantially different for these marginalized groups. So I want to thank the National Science Foundation for funding this work. Thank you.